Well, I am Michael Kirby. I was the chair of the United Nations Commission of Inquiry on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea. And before that, I was a judge of the High Court of Australia, which is the highest constitutional and legal court of Australia. So that is where I am coming from, and I, with my colleagues, produced the report setting out the truth of the human rights violations in North Korea. It wasn't difficult for us to conduct the inquiry. Of course, it would have been better if we could have gone into North Korea and gone to the places that were the subjects of the accusations. But in South Korea, there are more than 30,000 escapees, sometimes called defectors, who have come to this country to escape the regime in North Korea. And we advertised the setting up of the inquiry by the Human Rights Council. We were very quickly overwhelmed with people who wanted to come and give their testimony. And in the end, we had to cut off the testimony because there was just so much. And we had already covered the 9 points in our mandate. So it was not difficult in this case for us to get plenty of evidence. And the evidence pointed generally in the one direction, that of very serious human rights abuses, and some of them rising to the level of crimes against humanity. The abuses included abuses in terms of freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, freedom of religious belief, freedom to move inside North Korea and outside North Korea, the abduction of people, abduction of North Korean nationals, the retention of prisoners of war contrary to the agreement of the armistice, and also the abduction of foreign nationals, including a significant number of nationals of Japan. The terrible wrongs during the famine of the 1990s and the deprivation of food supply at the very time that North Korea was building up its nuclear capability was very distressing, and the large numbers of people who were confined to detention camps, generally with other members of their family other than the person who was accused. It was the practice, and still is the practice as we understand it, to incarcerate in detention camps those who are regarded as enemies to the regime, plus their parents, plus their children, in order to remove them from society. So that's just a thumbnail sketch. There were many other terrible wrongs, and all of them are set out in the report of the COI. Well, the first thing that has to be done is to talk about it and to examine the report of the COI. We were addressed at the Jeju Forum by Al Gore, and he made a wonderful address about the what he described in his book as the inconvenient truths of climate change. Well, there's a second inconvenient truth at the Jeju Forum, and it's the inconvenient truth that's contained in the report of the Commission of Inquiry. This is the Commission of Inquiry report, and you cannot establish peace and security on the Korean Peninsula without addressing the inconvenient truth of the terrible wrongs that have been found against North Korea, and without giving accountability to the people who have been the subject of those wrongs before the international community. So there are two inconvenient truths at Jeju. One of them is the inconvenient truth of climate change, and the other is the inconvenient truth of human rights abuses in North Korea, crimes against humanity at the very time of the development of very serious weapons of mass destruction by that country. North Korea was given every opportunity to engage with us. We asked to call on their ambassador in Geneva. We made arrangements for them to have the access to the tribunal when we conducted the investigation in public. We gave them the facility of having a representative to speak for them, to ask questions of the witnesses. And when we had completed our inquiry, we sent a copy of the report before we delivered it to the United Nations, to the Supreme Leader, giving him an opportunity to correct anything that he said was a factual mistake or anything on which he wanted to express a different point of view. So we observed due process, but their strategy was to have no connection with us, to pull down the blind and shut the door and pull up the drawbridge and have no connection with the Commission of Inquiry. And I think that strategy led the United Nations in the Human Rights Council, in the General Assembly, and eventually even in the Security Council, to vote very strongly in favour of the report of the Commission and to insist that there be accountability for the crimes of North Korea. We certainly can and we must deal with them at the same time. We cannot sweep the serious findings of the Commission of Inquiry under the carpet and hope that they will go away and ignore the obligation that is imposed by international law. Where you have crimes against humanity, they are crimes of great significance that demand accountability. And so far as I know, the United Nations has never traded off responding to crimes against humanity without securing some appropriate arrangement for accountability for those crimes. So not only can we deal with the two issues, peace and security and human rights at the same time, but we must deal with them at the same time, because if we simply push the human rights issues to one side, there will be no stability. There will be no way that we can avoid the obligation in the long term. And therefore, it has to be part of any package that is made for the settlement of the differences between North Korea and the rest of the world. Well, I've been very impressed by the Jeju Forum, and I've been very impressed by the subtlety and the sophistication of the audience and of the speakers, and very impressed by the opening special address by former Vice President of the United States, Al Gore. But he brought the message of the inconvenient truth of climate change, and I will be bringing the message of the inconvenient truth of human rights in North Korea. And just as in the case of climate change, we ultimately faced up to the inconvenient truth. That was inconvenient in the sense that it was sometimes seen as threatening to jobs of people and threatening to political positions and even to political candidates. But we have had to face up to it because there is no way that we can ignore those serious problems for human rights and for peace and stability in the world, as Mr. Gore pointed out. But likewise, there will be no peace and stability in North Korea until we deal with the human rights violations in that country. The motto of the Jeju Forum this year is peace and prosperity. Now, peace is not only the absence of war, it is the feeling of tranquility and ability of human beings to live peacefully and calmly with one another, not under the daily threat of terror at home or weapons of mass destruction abroad. So peace cannot be secured, nor prosperity, unless we address the issues of human rights in North Korea. And that's the message that I'm bringing to the Jeju Forum, and I hope that people will listen to me just as they listened to Al Gore. I don't think I'll get a Nobel Prize for it, but I still think it is just as important as the issues of climate change. Well, the main issues that I'm going to deal with are the issues of lack of freedom of expression and freedom of access to information. In North Korea, amazingly, ordinary citizens do not have access to the internet. They have access to an intranet, but they don't have access to all the information and the opinions and views that exist in the world, including about them and about the Supreme Leader. And that's why in the admirable decision of President Moon Jae-in to reach out to and engage with North Korean people, which the Commission of Inquiry of the United Nations also supported in its report. It will be important to do that in addressing also the issues of human rights. And today at Jeju, in his recorded message, President Moon was the only one of the speakers who actually spoke of human rights. He spoke of his own history as a human rights lawyer, and he indicated his commitment to work for the human rights of the people of North Korea. And I was very reassured by that statement. And as a human rights lawyer myself in my earlier days, before I was appointed a judge, I know that when you work in human rights, you hear human stories and you hear human injustices, and they are very touching to you and very affecting to you, and you commit yourself in your mind and in your heart to ensuring that we will develop a world and develop nations that are respectful of human rights and that give due protection for them. I think the Korean government under President Park and earlier presidents, and also under President Moon, will be very dedicated to trying to address the issues of human rights in North Korea. I don't pretend that it's an easy task, but every Korean leader that I have spoken to has told me how deeply they feel about the division of their country. It must never be forgotten by foreigners that this was a division that was never decided by Korean people. They did not decide to divide the peninsula. It was imposed upon them by foreign leaders as the Second World War was coming to a conclusion. And it's still an imposed and unnatural division. And it's a division which is deeply against the interests of the people of Korea. A point was made today that if only the railway line could be opened up from Busan through North Korea and into China, that would lead to enormous economic advantages, not only to South Korea, but also to North Korea. And I hope that I will survive long enough to see a leader of North Korea rejoicing happily and embracing his top officials, not at the development of weapons that can cause millions of people to die, but at the development of a railway line and of new industries and economic advantages and prosperity that will be to the advantage of the people of North Korea and the people of South Korea, and to the advantage of the whole world and the planet, instead of threatening the world and the planet with terribly dangerous weapons. Well, since I arrived in the Republic of Korea, South Korea, on the 29th of May, that is a question that I've been repeatedly asked. What is the new administration going to do? I can't answer that. That is something that is going to be answered in due course when the President's ministry is set up and the ministers are in place and the decisions are made. But President Moon has made it clear that he wants to reach out to North Korea. It is the fact that in the COI report, reaching out to North Korea and establishing person-to-person contacts was an important part of the strategy which the Commission of Inquiry recommended. We didn't recommend cutting off North Korea and having no discussions or contact with them. We recommended a stepping up of the person-to-person contacts, the professional contacts, the contacts between museums, the contacts between dentists, contacts of a professional kind. This is what happened in the case of the division of Germany when Willy Brandt became the Chancellor in 1970. And I would not be surprised if there will be steps in that direction, and that will be healthy. But they have to come with the development of responses to the demand for accountability for the most grave crimes of North Korea, which are the crimes against humanity. That is what the world promised in 1945, and that is what I believe the world will ultimately wish to deliver. My last words on the Jeju Forum is that it's an amazing and extremely valuable engagement of top minds, top experts, but also ordinary citizens. It's very important in the issues that I'm concerned with, and Mr. Gore was concerned with, climate change and human rights, that we don't let the experts ever get too distant from the ordinary people, because the ordinary people know what are really important issues for them, their families, their children, their workmates and their community. And those ordinary issues include climate change, they certainly include the risks of nuclear weapons, and they undoubtedly include universal human rights.